Do I have to do the field sobriety test if I'm being investigated for a DUI? So you're driving and you've been pulled over and an officer may suspect you of driving under the influence. In Indiana, they're probably going to conduct what's called an OVWI investigation. That stands for operating a vehicle while intoxicated. It's Indiana's version of what's more commonly known as a DUI. Now, when an officer pulls you over, if they notice some signs of intoxication, whether that's slurred speech, red and glossy eyes, alcohol beverages in view, or if you smell like alcohol, the officer may ask you to step out of your vehicle and perform what's called field sobriety tests. Now, the three most common standard field sobriety tests in Indiana are an eye test, which is known as the HGN test. That's where they're going to take a little pen and go back and forth to look at your eyes to see if there's signs of intoxication. Another test they're going to want you to perform is a walk and turn test, where you will walk on a straight line and turn at the officer's direction. And finally, one of the common tests they do is also called a one-legged stand, where, as you can suspect, the officer is going to ask you to stand on one leg for a period of time. The officer can establish probable cause, and then he is allowed to ask you to come down to the station for a certified breath test or to the hospital for a blood draw to try to see if you either have alcohol or drugs in your breath or in your blood. Now, a big question we get is, do I have to do these standard field sobriety tests? And the answer is no. Well, we always tell people to be cooperative with the police because it's usually in your best interest. At the end of the day, these field sobriety tests you do not have to do if you do not wish to do them. Now, the officer may get angry and may get upset and think, well, if you're not going to do these tests, what do you have to hide? You must be intoxicated. Where things start to take a change is if the officer does build probable cause with or without those field sobriety tests to the point where he reads you Indiana's implied consent law. Indiana's implied consent law is basically the point at which an officer determines in his mind that he has probable cause that you're driving intoxicated, whether that's on alcohol or drugs. And at that point, he's going to read you something off of a department issue card, basically stating that he believes that you are under the influence, and he's going to ask you to take a certified chemical test, whether that be a breath test at the station or a blood draw at a hospital. Now, he'll warn you, failure to say yes and consent to this certified chemical test will result in a 1-year driver's license suspension if you refuse. It's called a refusal here in Indiana. If you refuse that, the officer then will submit a search warrant to the judge, and then no matter what you said to the officer, they're still going to take you for that chemical breath test or blood draw. So while the initial field sobriety test you can say no to, the point at which an officer asks you to consent to a certified test, we're always going to suggest that you say yes to take that certified chemical test, because the officer is going to get that one way or another. They're going to get a warrant from the judge, and they're still going to get that breath or blood that they want. But if you consent to it, we can still keep you driving while the case progresses. The second that you say no and a refusal goes in, it's going to be a lot harder for you to be driving either while the case progresses or after the case is concluded, one way or another. If you have questions about field sobriety tests or OVWIs in general, please give us at the Marc Lopez Law Firm a phone call, 317-632-3642, and always remember, plead the fifth.